Empires usually fall to armies, but this one fell to numbers. In the late 1800s, the Ottoman Empire wasn't conquered on the battlefield. It was bled dry by debt, no invasion, no final war, just foreign bankers, silent contracts, and an empire that never saw the trap closing. By the time they realized what was happening, it was already over. It all began with a vision, not of conquest, but of survival. By the dawn of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire, a colossus that had straddled continents for 500 years, found itself in a terrifying new world. The map was being redrawn by steam engines, telegraph wires, and industrial might, forces far more potent than any cavalry charge. The sultans in Istanbul gazed westward and saw a stark truth. To endure, they must transform. They dreamed of steel tracks stitching their fragmented lands together, of modern armies clad in crisp uniforms, of grand schools that would birth a new, enlightened generation. This was their desperate pact with the future, a promise to drag an ancient empire, kicking and screaming, into the modern age. But ambition has a price tag. Centuries of costly wars, receding borders, and a sclerotic administration had bled the imperial treasury white. The empire's financial veins were clogged with a decaying tax system, rampant inflation, and a corruption so endemic it functioned as a shadow government. The state's income was a meager trickle, barely enough to pay its own soldiers. So the Ottomans faced a cruel dilemma: modernize or perish. Yet they possessed not a fraction of the capital required to do so. Their salvation, or so it seemed, arrived not on warships but in leather-bound portfolios. European financiers, from the grand halls of London City to the parlors of Parisian banks, saw not a struggling empire but an extraordinary opportunity. Here was a vast, resource-rich land, a legendary name, desperate for cash. It was the perfect borrower. Between 1854 and 1875, the floodgates opened. The Ottoman state secured 15 major foreign loans. The terms were punishing. Interest rates soared above 10%, and after layers of commissions, bribes, and fees, often only 60% of the nominal loan amount ever reached Istanbul. Yet, in the glittering palaces overlooking the Bosphorus, the math seemed to work. The initial infusions of capital were intoxicating. Railways began to creep across the Anatolian plains. Ports were upgraded. The military imported shiny new rifles. For European investors, Ottoman bonds became the fashionable asset of the era, a seemingly virtuous circle where profit met paternalistic, civilizing mission. The financial press touted them as safe, lucrative, and a means of tethering the East to Western progress. A silent, profound shift occurred. The empire's sovereignty, piece by piece, was being collateralized, but a dangerous illusion took root. The borrowed gold was a mirage, and it evaporated almost upon arrival. A staggering portion was never invested in productive engines of growth. Instead, it vanished into the ornate ceilings of Dolmabahce Palace, funded the Sultan's obsessive collection of European clocks and jewels, and greased the palms of a bloated bureaucracy. The loans were paying for a facade, a magnificent gilded stage set designed to project strength while the beams underneath rotted. The empire was buying the costume of modernity without building the muscle. It was a patient consuming sugar for energy, unaware it was developing a fatal diabetes of debt. The borrowed time bought a glittering illusion, but financial gravity cannot be defied forever. And when the global tide turned, the empire would be left exposed on the rocks, facing a reckoning more humiliating than any military defeat. What happened next would prove that a nation can be conquered without a single shot being fired. The year 1873 was a fault line across the global economy. A stock market crash in Vienna triggered a chain reaction, the Long Depression. In London and Paris, the easy money vanished. The fountain of credit that had sustained the Ottoman fantasy suddenly ran dry. Yet the empire's obligations did not. Every month, like a metronome of doom, ships carried chests of gold from Istanbul's harbors to European vaults. The empire was now a prisoner of compound interest. By 1875, the numbers became unspeakable. Over £200 million in debt, consuming more than half of all state revenue just to service the interest. The Ottoman government was functionally a tax-collecting agency for its foreign creditors. In October 1875, the Sublime Porte made a world-shaking announcement. It declared a partial default. Creditors would receive only half their due in cash, the rest in low-value bonds. In the financial districts of Europe, panic was instantaneous. The sick man of Europe wasn't just ill, he was bankrupt. The fashionable investment was now Turkish trash. Newspapers that had once praised the loans now spewed vitriol, painting the Ottomans as deceitful Orientals. But inside the empire, the default unleashed a hell far more concrete. The state's lifeblood, cash, stopped flowing. Soldiers, the very enforcers of imperial order, went unpaid for months. Civil servants abandoned their posts. In the countryside, tax collectors, under savage pressure from Istanbul, became predators, extracting the last grain from starving peasants. The social contract, already frayed, disintegrated. Famine and fury became partners. This internal collapse was the spark in the powder keg of nationalism. In the Balkan provinces, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Bulgaria, long-simmering resentments exploded into outright rebellion. The empire, unable to pay its own troops, was now forced to fight wars it could not afford. The default had not just bankrupted the treasury, it had bankrupted the state's authority. Desperate to project control, Sultan Abdulaziz plunged into even more lavish spending, a final tragic performance of power. It was a fatal misjudgment. In 1876, he was deposed in a palace coup, a ruler destroyed by the very debts he sought to master. His successors inherited an impossible legacy. By 1881, European powers, their patience and portfolios exhausted, demanded ultimate security. The result was the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, OPDA. This was not merely an agreement, it was a financial occupation. A council of European officials, French, British, German, Italian, Austrian, took direct, unilateral control of the empire's most lucrative revenue streams, its salt monopoly, tobacco taxes, silk dues, and fisheries. They controlled the customs houses. Imagine it, foreign bankers and offices in Galata deciding how the centuries-old Ottoman Empire could spend its own money. Sovereignty had a new definition. It ended at the ledger book. This was the point of no return. The empire had lost control of its economic heart. But the most shocking twist is still to come. The true cost of this financial surrender wouldn't be measured in pounds, but in the very dismemberment of a continent, a legacy of chaos that shapes our world to this day. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration was a parasite with a legal charter. It efficiently siphoned wealth directly from the Ottoman economy to European bondholders, starving the state of investment for infrastructure, education, or development. The empire was caught in a vicious cycle. To prove creditworthiness and avoid further humiliation, it had to prioritize debt repayment over everything else, including the welfare of its own people. This bred deep generational resentment. Every tax on salt or tobacco collected by a foreigner was a daily reminder of subjugation. Politically, the debt administration created a state within a state. It employed thousands, had its own armed guards, and answered to foreign capitals. Its existence neutered the Ottoman government, making genuine economic policy impossible. European powers now had a permanent, legitimate lever to pull for political concessions. Want a favorable trade deal? Threaten to adjust the debt terms? Need a naval base? The discussion started in the OPDA's boardroom. The silent economic war was won. The empire was now a protectorate in all but name. This profound weakening accelerated the centrifugal forces tearing the empire apart. Nationalist movements, especially in the Balkans and the Arab provinces, saw a central authority that was visibly helpless, its finances puppeteered from abroad. The wars that followed, the Balkan Wars of 1912-13, were the direct bloody harvest sown by financial collapse. By the time the world marched into the cataclysm of World War I, the Ottoman Empire was less a sovereign actor and more a strategic asset to be gambled by its German creditors against its British and French ones. Its fate was sealed not in the trenches of Gallipoli alone, but decades earlier in the bond markets. The Ottoman tale is a foundational tragedy of modern finance. It is the original blueprint for debt imperialism. We have seen this script replayed with chilling familiarity in Latin America's lost decade of the 1980s, where structural adjustment programs mirrored the OPDA's control, in the Greek financial crisis of the 2010s, where technocrats from Brussels and Frankfurt effectively governed national budgets, and in the precarious debt burdens of many emerging nations today. The pattern is hauntingly consistent. The seduction of easy foreign capital, the neglect of internal reform, the addiction to spending on prestige over productivity, and the eventual crushing loss of agency. The empire's fatal error was a confusion of symbols for substance. They believed they could purchase modernity's fruits without planting the seeds, without building transparent institutions, a fair tax system, or a productive industrial base. They borrowed to appear strong, not to become strong. When the inevitable crisis hit, the magnificent palace had no foundation. It collapsed from within under the weight of compounded interest. What truly destroys an empire? Not always the bang of cannons, but often the whisper of a balance sheet. The slow, inexorable transfer of economic sovereignty is a conquest more complete than any military victory. An army can be defeated and rise again, but a nation that loses the right to govern its own economic destiny has surrendered its future. The Ottoman Empire's story is a stark, eternal warning. Independence can be signed away line by line on a loan agreement. When the bills come due, they are paid not just in gold, but in history itself. This is more than history. It's a lens to understand our world. The silent economic wars never truly ended. They just evolved.